What is going on in Washington, D.C. is no less than a teachable moment. It's a moment of moral clarity, and the intended audience is the Palestinian Authority. Washington is saying, you can't pay terrorists and hope to have a peace partner called Israel and an independent entity called a Palestinian Authority or perhaps an independent sovereign entity. You cannot pay terrorists or the families of terrorists or engage in the demonization of Israel and think that you are going to have a peace agreement with your Israeli neighbor. And in fact, the United States government is putting its money where its mouth is by changing decades of diplomacy and recognizing the critical importance of Israel's united capital. And the teachable moment extends to the BDS movement. And it's not only this government and past governments, but it's the United States Congress. Both the Senate and the House have said to the BDSers, boycott, divestment, and sanction activists, radical actors who support terror groups like Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, Palestinian Front for Liberation of Palestine, and others. What Congress has said to them is, the United States is not going to go for this. Enough is enough. If you want peace, leaders of the Palestinian Authority and the NGOs in Ramallah, who are financed by European states, you are going to have to stop the demonization. You are going to have to back off the delegitimization of Israel. And by the way, of Jews, not only in Israel, but on university campuses across North America, who are suffering harassment, violence, intimidation. 50 governors of 50 of the United States have said no. They've followed the moral clarity of Andrew Cuomo, governor of New York. Remember what he said? He said recently, if you boycott Israel, New York will boycott you. Now that's a teachable moment. And that moment echoed to every one of the 50 governors of the United States. It's the only time in modern American history where 50 governors have taken a principled moral position on the existential position of a dear ally. And in fact, 23 of the United States have passed state laws criminalizing BDS. So the United States leadership, both its policymakers, its local leaders, its national leaders, and the United States government have understood that BDS, just like paying the terrorists and just like the Palestinian Authority demonizing Israel's own and only capital, Jerusalem, will not put up with the radicalization, the hate speech, and the affiliated violence of the BDS movement. And that's a positive development. In fact, it makes one think, have we won the war against BDS? Is it all over? We should pack up and go home. And the answer is no. I want to tell you a secret. There is a bigger battlefield when it comes to BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions. There's a bigger battlefield. There's an amphibious assault going on that the U.S. Congress is less aware of. And I would argue that Jewish leadership is less aware of, and that people of goodwill, men and women, friends of Israel, people of goodwill around the world are less aware of. And that is a weapon called anti-normalization. Anti-normalization is a weapon that the Palestinian Authority leadership and those NGOs in Ramallah have used in order to stick a knife through any possibility of peaceful relations between Israelis and Palestinians. You know, denormalization, which is the Palestinian version of the anti-normalization that we saw against former apartheid rogue state South Africa of the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s until apartheid ended in 1991 and then changed its government in 1994, is the middle link in a poisonous food chain. The lowest lying fruit on that food chain, BDS. the actual sanctioning, divestment, and boycotting of any company that does business with Israel or Israel itself. But it's that middle link that's the most poisonous part of the food chain. Because when you talk about anti-normalization, you're talking about treating Israel as a cancer, as a rogue state, as another version of North Korea or former apartheid South Africa, in which, if you were anything but a white person, you could not so much drink a glass of water out of the same cup as your white fellow South African. In other words, what people don't realize when they use the word apartheid against Israel as an accusation against its very existence, nothing to do with territory. The apartheid accusation and the denormalization corollary basically insist that Israel, as a cancer, the way the Iranian regime refers to the Jewish state, and the way many on college campuses, such as the Students for Justice in Palestine, or the Jewish Voice for Peace, anti-Western, radical, hate-filled, extremist, terror-affiliated groups will have you believe that Israel, like apartheid South Africa, has no reason to exist. So there's our first conclusion, that denormalization of the Palestinian Authority, the leadership, and NGOs in Ramallah has nothing to do with creating a Palestinian state. It has everything to do with destroying the one and only Jewish one. And what the American Congress has done is that they've listened very well. Because if you listen to the leadership of the Palestinian Authority, of course the Hamas, Fatah, and others, the NGOs in Ramallah, you hear this zero-sum game that denormalization represents. The zero-sum game is Israel shouldn't exist. Israel's a rogue state. Now, what's crazy about that, and insufferable, and cannot be countenanced, and must be wiped out, the former apartheid regime was based on a government-sanctioned status of racial superiority, white racial superiority. Now, those of you who have been to Israel and know people who live in Israel know that, and here's a secret, Israel is a non-white majority country. The majority of Israelis come from non-European states. And here's another secret. Israel, according to law, according to its basic law, protects all minorities from its 1,250,000 Arab citizens and residents of Jerusalem and citizens of Israel who are guaranteed full equality under the law. That's why a Palestinian Supreme Court justice sent a former Israeli president to jail. That's why the leading physicians in Israel, leading lawyers, leading doctors, leading engineers, contractors, you name it, are Palestinians in Israel. That is what's called a multicultural democratic reality. Now, those that push Israel as an apartheid state and denormalization will have you believe that Israel, like former apartheid South Africa, is a white racist regime that has no interest or is not governed by human rights or civil rights. And therefore, all denormalization requires is that we unmask it. And it's not that difficult to unmask.